Hi, everybody. We're just waiting for people to come in, but welcome to the last closing session of Love, Sex, and Data. I'm Paromita. My colleague Manak is here.
Hi, I'm Manak.
Manak, what's the one thing you've learned from Love, Sex, and Data while we wait for people to come in?
The one thing, there's so many things that I've learned from Love, Sex, and Data. But the first thing and the most important thing I think that I want to share that we've learned in the course of these 3 days is from our wonderful ISL interpreters who've been helping us make sure that this conference is accessible. So that is the signs for these beautiful words. The first sign for the great word love, which is this, for the word sex, which is this, for data, which is making a D and then collecting it, and for the word pleasure, which is the same as the word happiness, it seems. So we need to eventually find a unique name for pleasure, a word for pleasure, or a sign for pleasure as well in this. But it'll be nice if everybody who's watching can also maybe practice this with us a couple of times. So for everybody who's joining, has just joined right now, to make sure you know the key takeaways from this conference is the signs for love, sex, data, and pleasure, which is love, sex. You do this and it's like two taps on your cheek. Data, which is a D, and then you collect it. That's how you say data. And pleasure, which is this. Could be one hand, could also be two hands. Paromita, you want to explain that?
But I was saying it could be one hand if it's masturbation and two if it's partnered sex. But I don't know if that's official. It would have to be still.
That's not official, but we can all innovate on different kinds of pleasure. I think expression has a lot to do with it as well. So that's something that we can all take away, of course, from this wonderful, exhilarating conference that we've had over the past 3 days. And apart from paying attention to the sign language, paying attention to the various ways in which people are accessing this conference, I think if there's one thing that I have definitely taken away and really sort of it stood out for me is the very different ways in which many people who were at the conference, all the different speakers, performers, people who gave time generously to be here, the different ways in which they're engaging with programming, research, art, music, law, criminology, to talking about abortions, to talking about popular culture and social media. I think there are so many ways in which people are engaging with these ideas. And almost everybody, actually, almost everybody who was here at the conference had so much to learn and speak to the other things that were also going on in these spaces. So I think this, we were convinced, like you were saying, Paromita, at the start, that this is a great idea to bring all of these different fields together and have something that will allow everybody to cross-share and cross-learn. And it has been a great affirmation of that for all of us who are the organizing team, that this is indeed a deeply pleasurable and a deeply learning exercise. I'd started the conference saying we want to learn. And I think there's a lot of immense learning that has happened in the 3 days of this conference that continues to happen. And the affirmation that this is a conversation that should continue, that we should keep on doing these conversations across these fields and across these sectors. I think that's something that has been great as a learning for me. What about you? What would you say is your takeaway from the conference?
I think, yeah, I agree with you that, one of the things that we really saw happening is like a rendition of the idea that different disciplines have to speak to each other, different perspectives have to speak to each other, that every single person who came spoke about their way of doing things, but never asserted that it's the only way it should be done. They all felt all things are valid. I think the other thing that really came through in many of the panels, and it would be great to hear also what audience members thought, was that, data is always seen as being numbers. And as Vishaka Datta said in her pleasure pocket talk, that if you went to sleep and had pleasurable dreams, but your Fitbit said you were restless, what is the truth of your night, right? And both the things might be true in their own way. So the need to take qualitative and quantitative data into account, the need to look at different kinds of human insight, either through the arts, through storytelling, through community organizing, through all sorts of things. I think that we really heard from many people about the importance of that. And I think we're going to be thinking about it a lot. And another thing that I wanted to say that I think this is one of the 10 best conferences I've attended. And the thing is that the other 9 conferences in that list are conferences that were inspiring in this way. That I learned a lot from those. And I guess I was also trying to evoke that feeling for myself and others again when we were working together. And I think that when people spoke, one of the things that really moved me was how often people alluded to the work of others. That they were constantly talking about their own work as being embedded in a community and an ecosystem of ideas. And in the last panel that I was a part of, on digital recipes, creating pleasurable spaces for young people online, I think what came through was that online and offline are inextricably a part of each other. The online is not a monolith, the offline is not a monolith, and no matter what technology, data, that's all very well, but in the end, it is about how we connect with each other, how we are willing to reshape power, how we are willing to transform ourselves. And that pleasure is really a great prism for us to continuously see the world and ourselves differently and transform without fear. And I think that comes through a lot. So when all of the panels are up online, I hope people who missed some will get to watch and hear.
Absolutely. And I think you say this often, that the best conferences or places of coming together are ones that leave your head buzzing with ideas, right? This is something I've learned from you because you've said this. And I think I was describing this to you or somebody. It's one of those conferences which we have organized. So I don't want to end by tooting my own horn in that way. But it's like, it's been akin to attending the panels because full credit to everybody who generously shared their time, thoughts, ideas, and helped us build this conference together. That, at many moments in the last 3 days when I was attending a panel or looking at, hearing a keynote speaker or the pleasure pockets, or even in the evening, fun after hours. Yesterday, where everybody in the open mic was propping everybody else up and just so deeply appreciative of what other people were bringing to every space. I think for me, it was one of those moments where, you look at yourself in the mirror and say, who's this great looking, well-dressed person? And you realize, oh, it's me. That's how, at this conference, I've looked at from a distance and said, wow, these are great people sharing great ideas in this one space. And it's been absolutely fantastic to attend. And my last thing that I want to outline from today morning's keynote is this whole idea on whether it is love, sex, data, pleasure, who is the expert? We have to continuously keep asking, who is really the expert? Is there a hierarchy, or should there be a hierarchy of who the expert is and who is the person who needs to learn? Or we need to flip this and say everybody actually is the expert of their own lives, and that's who we have to deeply listen to and learn from. So I think that's the other big takeaway for me at the end of the 3 days. Yeah. So you were saying something?
No.
Yeah, so I go ahead.
No, I think like there were also a lot of people who worked on the conference, and we wanted to be able to thank them too.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've seen some people in front of the screen on Zoom in this conference, but there are a huge team of people. There's a huge team of people that has been involved tirelessly in putting this up over the last 3 days. It has been a lot of effort, and we do want to acknowledge the effort of all of our team members who've been involved in it. So we can go to a slide. We definitely want to bring their names up for everybody to see. And of course, if there is any feedback on the conference, anybody has thoughts on what you have taken away from the conference, feel free to put that in the chat as we are going through this list. So these are the organizations that have been involved. Thank you to each of these organizations for their effort, time, for being involved, being partners in pleasure. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, so, and the next, and a big shout out to Nisha, who you haven't seen on screen so much, for helping us really pull this together and bring it together so well. So definitely a big shout out to Nisha as well. You've seen Paromita and I on the screen a lot, but not Nisha perhaps so much. These are the different agencies and the teams who have been involved in helping us put together the conference, the video streaming, the overall management of putting everything, that all these diverse ideas that we had together and giving it a shape that could be brought in front of everybody, for the social media work and the tweeting and everything that has been going on, for the streaming, for making sure the website is available to everybody, everybody's able to join, all the technicians, engineers, artists who have helped us do the sound and the voice and the video quality checks to make sure everything is tip top and good quality for everybody who's tuning in. And the wonderful design that you see all around in this frame done by colleagues from the Agents of Ishq team. Kudos to everybody in the design team as well. These are the organizational teams that have been involved, the team from Agents of Ishq, the team from the YP Foundation, which is the next slide. So thank you all of our colleagues for being around, for in the background quietly helping to bring this conference up. And the biggest thanks to the interpreters in the last slide, who have helped us make sure that the conference becomes more accessible, to be able to provide it in regional languages, to be able to provide it in Indian Sign Language, so that more people are able to access and engage with these ideas and the conference overall. So thank you, everybody. I hope we didn't leave out anybody's name in the rush of making this slide and putting these together at the last minute. If we did, apologies, but we are deeply appreciative of everybody's work and time and effort in helping us bring this conference to all of those who tuned in over the last 3 days. And with that big note of thanks, another note of thanks to all the people, the speakers who have been involved and given us their time to be at the conference, to present, to share their ideas, and to all of the audience members who've tuned in and made us feel happy that we put this together and people are actually tuning in and watching and listening and with us in this whole journey. So thank you to each one of you. With that, I would hand over to Paromita to lead us into the next closing sections of our conference.
Thanks, Manak. So without any delay, I'd like to introduce you to our closing conversation, which is with Shubha Mudgal, who you are here to listen to. I mean, when somebody talks about somebody like Shubha Mudgal, they always say Shubha Mudgal needs no introduction. And I always feel like it's really unfair to artists to say they don't need any introduction, as if they're just one thing and that's all we ever need to know about them. But the thing about Shubha Mudgal is that she is, of course, an extremely well-known and well-loved musician, and she's a vocalist and composer who has been groomed by some of the finest musicians and musicologists in India. And she was trained in Hindustani classical music by Pandit Ram Ashray Jha, and also received guidance from Pandit Vinay Chandra Morgalia, Pandit Vasant Thakkar, Pandit Jitendra Abhisheki, and Pandit Kumar Gandharv. She also received training in Tumri from Srimati Naina Devi, and is thus a versatile performer. In addition to being a performer, she has also won recognition as a composer and is a recipient of numerous awards, including the Padma Shri in 2000. But I think she's also one of our important public intellectuals, because she embodies what it can be for us to watch an artist and think about knowledge and life and pleasure and art. I think all of us who are in the audience would know her in different ways. Some of us would have encountered her through popular music. Some would have encountered her through Man Ke Manjeere, which is an iconic song. Some would know about her work through her work with Mirabai's poetry, and others through classical music. Still others through the research work that she has done on musical traditions of India. And the work that she continues to do to create a positive ecosystem for contemporary and classical music. I think that her intelligence and warmth shine through in the way that she talks about and does her work. And for us, there couldn't be a better ending to the conference than to have a conversation with her about how music and art are a repository of a different kind of data, a data of the intangible, that music and art exist in order to kind of render the emotional, all the things that we don't exactly see or can't exactly prove through numbers, they actually reside in art, and they show us a completely different view of the world if we will just open ourselves out to that. So I'm going to introduce, having introduced you to Shubha Mudgal, I will move us forward to the conversation. And like any, or like most good musical extravaganzas, there's some change of costume and location here because we pre-recorded the conversation. So I would ask my colleagues to put on the video, and Shubha ji will be with us for a Q&A with the audience at the end of the conversation. So please stay on there. Thank you. So one of the things, one of the reasons we really wanted to have this conversation with you was because so much of the work that you've done seems so conscious of the idea of pleasure, pleasure of form, pleasure of content, pleasure of experience of art. And yet, when it comes to pleasure, there's a kind of inhibition and even a sort of silence around the idea of what is pleasure. You know, like even when we talk about sex, people talk about sexual rights, sexual health, but the word pleasure makes people uneasy. And sometimes it's this whole thing of these are Western ideas, you know, and we don't, hamare culture mein in cheezon ki definition alag hai. But I was just wondering if you could tell us something about what we would learn about our own traditions of pleasure if we looked at our artistic traditions.
Well, in the context of music in particular, I feel that the idea of Anand or pleasure for no other reason than to actually go through the experience is a very, very common concept in the study and the making of music. So very often you will hear that people say, "Hum gaate hain, lekin swantah sukhaye ke liye." So it is for my own pleasure, for my own peace, for my own happiness that I'm making art, making music. But really speaking, and of course that is true, but really speaking, I think the study of music and performance really reveals to you different kinds of pleasure at every twist and turn through the journey. And it's quite amazing because just the sheer pleasure of listening to sound is a very, very profound experience. But also, you know, there is so much information encapsulated in many of the compositions that we sing, that as you learn them, the process of learning perhaps is imitative, and you follow your teacher's voice in trying to learn what they are singing to you, memorize that. But as you go along, each composition reveals to you different kinds of experiences of pleasure. And in the song texts, Paromita, there's so much fantastic information hidden in those, encapsulated in those lyrics of the Bandish, that it becomes quite interesting to see where they're taking us. And you'd be surprised to hear that in today's world, where we are all streaming music on different digital platforms, very often you will find a piece of classical music where there is an asterisk or some kind of something to denote that the lyrics are explicit. So it's very, very, it always makes me grin when I go on to iTunes or Spotify and I find that the lyrics are defined as explicit, because if, here is this very ancient tradition which is revered, which is considered spiritual, and because somebody's translated the lyrics, they turn out to be marked as explicit. And it's quite fun to see that, because really speaking, in this tradition, the idea of explicit lyrics is not something to be abashed about. It's not considered something that should be swept under the carpet.
Or even categorized in that way, right? Because it's parental guidance kind of vibe with
Yes.
the art.
Yes.
So, but those lyrics, what is the explicit nature of those lyrics though?
See, a lot of the compositions, a lot of the bandishes of Khayal, Tumri, Drupad, even Drupad, are of course to do with, let's say, deities and the various leelas around the various stories, the mythology. But within that too, Shringar is such an important aspect of the lyrics. So something which perhaps if you translate into English would turn out to be absolutely unabashedly erotic or beautifully romantic. I mean, we learn these songs when we are young children. In fact, one that comes to my mind in Rag Bihag is a very common bandish that all of us learn. And it says, Lat uljhi सुलझा जा बालम हाथन मेहंदी लगी मोरे बालम लट उलझी सुलझा जा बालम माथे की बिंदिया बिखर गई है अपने हाथ सजा जा बालम हाथन मेहंदी लगी मोरे बालम लट उलझी सुलझा जा बालम. See how beautifully flirtatious, romantic, almost seductive it is. Because here's the protagonist sitting with mehendi on her hands, and she asks somebody who could be a lover, a spouse, maybe just a friend, to come and help her remove the lock of hair from her forehead, which is falling on her forehead. And I think it's such a pretty image. Possibly she tried removing it herself, and the bindi on her forehead was smudged in the process. So just settle that too. I mean, it's such a beautiful, romantic and yet very playful, very charming piece of literature, which all of us learn when we were like, I think I learned it when I was about I first heard it when I was about 9 or 10 or something like that. I learned it a little later. But we grew up singing these songs and nobody told us that, hey, what the hell are you doing? You're inviting somebody for this little, little rendezvous almost. So these are the kind of compositions, and of course there are others which are more explicit, and I shall share those with you as we go along.
I mean, as you were singing this piece, I was thinking that there are so many layers of pleasure, right? There's the pleasure of touch. There's the pleasure of almost a kind of secret pact.
Yes.
Between the person who's singing, like in full view of everybody, do something very private.
Yes.
So there is a lot of sensuality, but it also tells us that sensuality exists simultaneously at many, many levels.
Yes.
So it's almost like a kind of sexuality education in song. Or the best kind of sexuality education in song, where you think it's a part of existence itself and not something to be kept in a separate category with an asterisk, so to speak.
And as I was saying, there are so many beautiful compositions which we all sing. There's one in the Rag Paraj which says, Chalo mitwa balam bagwa, hum tum piye madwa, kare rang raliyan. Now, how much more explicit do you want this to get? So this is really a pleasure trip that the two are taking. Chalo mitwa balam bagwa. Let's go to possibly a glade, forest, garden. Hum tum piye madwa. So there is actual wine and intoxication. Kare rang raliyan. And then lose ourselves to the entire process of pleasure. So I think there are these compositions to really try and translate them, and then to say that these are erotic, they are too erotic to be sung, or that they should not be sung in public, or to say let's perhaps remove some of these lyrics and replace them with something that is a little more acceptable to society. But as a student of music, all that can be done, has been done, and is often tried. But as a student of music, I would not want to lose the opportunity of learning all of this as it was. Then it's up to me to decide whether it's too vulgar, or whether it should be sanitized, or whether I should sing something else, or perhaps even there are other lyrics which are often they start a debate about misogyny, for example. So I think these should be left alone, and we should study them as they are and take our own conscious decisions about whether or not we want to share them with the public.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the idea of sharing with the public is interesting because, there are traditional texts. I mean, I'm using the word tradition now to mean basically there are old texts that have been translated by the British, which often did not translate the more erotic parts because they just felt like regular people cannot handle this. And that also underlies actually our entire censorship law, which is that the natives won't be able to deal with cinema, right? So the idea that there is a public that won't be able to handle hearing about desire. Do you feel that's really, really true of the public?
I wouldn't agree with that at all, I mean, I feel censorship is not required. I mean, and in any case, what censorship do we have? Around us, we are seeing huge amounts of intense violence. We don't censor that. In fact, it's all being staged even. So where is the question of censoring? And we are seeing violence against women. Are we censoring all of that or trying? I think there is really no point in trying censorship of this kind, particularly in the arts. I feel the arts must be left alone. And certainly, as a teacher, now I also teach. I'm no longer only a student, I'm also teaching. And I learn a lot as I teach. And I often wonder, is it possible for me to teach a young student the meaning of these lyrics? I can teach a young adult, I can teach maybe teenagers, but what about if there's a really young child who's learning? What do I do then? And I feel the tradition itself has many compositions. All I need to do as a teacher is to perhaps select one which talks about the day and night, which talks about the seasons, and this connect with nature, this connect with diurnal and nocturnal cycles, seasons. All of that is very much a part of the Hindustani classical music tradition. So all I need to do is that as a teacher is to educate myself with more compositions that I can share with a young child. But I don't think there is any need for censorship in that sense.
I mean, I think one of the things that comes through as from whatever you said is that there's a kind of inclusiveness in the idea of pleasure that is in the arts, that the arts actually recognize and accommodate numerous definitions of pleasure, that the sensory pleasure of nature and becoming aware of the world around you, and the private pleasures that lovers share, as well as the deep immersion, say, in the devotion to an ideal, whether that's God or Shah Rukh Khan, but to be deeply immersed in loving a spiritual idea. They're all different forms of pleasure in a way that human beings have, and through which human beings actually assert themselves. They are things that liberate us at multiple levels in our spirit. And I think that is partly why there's also so much control on the arts, because it has that liberatory quality innate to itself. Right?
Yeah. You did mention bhakti, and I feel in India, the idea of what is devotional is again extremely nuanced. So within temple texts, you will find beautiful descriptions of the deities of Krishna, Radha, and these are, what are called nakshik varnan. So sort of head to toe kind of descriptions, and they are written in the most lyrical, beautiful, sensual, and yet very dignified way. It is up to us to be able to read those, sing those with the same sense of having no apology for what one is doing, and at the same time the same sense of enjoyment in this revelation of the form of a beloved deity in great detail and with complete unabashedness.
So can you share an example of this maybe?
Yes, in fact, I selected something to share with you. So I'm going to read out part of a text that I found in, let me not tell you where I found it while I read it. बिराजत राधे रूप निधान सुंदरता की पुंज प्रगट तन पटतर त्रिया न आन. And then it says, so it talks about her sindoor on the forehead and the parting of her hair, etc., etc. But it also says, so let me read the English translation by John Stratton Hawley. It says, Radha, your treasury of loveliness glows. With a great store of beauty displayed by your body, what other woman can compare? Then as he goes on, as Surdas goes on, where is the poet who would say about your breasts, these are like pomegranate fruits? The two are not the same. The fruit retreats in shame, for these don't break apart. They've broken Hari's heart. So I think now here's a poem from one of the most iconic bhakti poets, Surdas Ji, from the Sur Sagar. And he's describing Radha's beauty in such poetic language, and there is no sense of holding back. Also, from what we know and have heard, that Surdas Ji was supposed to be blind or at least visually impaired. And for him to see this form in such great detail, I think it's a fascinating, there's so many stories being told about bhakti, about pleasure, about the male gaze on the female form, and about the manner in which all of this came together in the past. So where are we? Here we are sitting and discussing this, and all of this happened so many centuries ago.
I think one of the fascinating things about talking to artists about the traditions that they know well is to understand that tradition's an invention, right? Everybody is modern in their own time.
Yes.
And, in essence, everybody is saying, let's get a drink and get it on.
Yes.
In one language at different moments in the glade or in the bar. But, this also makes me think about the fact that a lot of people often think about these kinds of descriptions as objectification. This is a huge question that comes up, that describing the female form especially objectifies it. But to me, I heard while you were talking about it, not such a sense of objectification as a gaze of desire and admiration.
Sense of wonder, almost a sense of wonder, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and the sense that there is going to be some interaction between the bodies. It's not just something that is flattened.
Yes, not sort of, the dimensions are many. And in fact, now that you talked about the male gaze. So interestingly, I found another Surdas poem where it's not the male gaze on the female form, but he describes the women, young women of Braj, gazing at Krishna's body, his form, with the same sense of pleasure. And there is this line in it where Taruni Nirakha Hari Prati Ang, and there is this verse which describes them gazing at the hair on his chest going down to his navel in a kind of a line, where the description is that of a line of bees going towards a pot of honey. And of course, it is supposedly Surdas Ji. We don't know if this is actually Surdas Ji who wrote it, but it is there in one of the anthologies that are available. It is possible that it was written by somebody else, because there is this debate about how many poems actually were written by Surdas Ji himself. But the fact that even that tradition was being followed by other male poets or other poets for centuries later, and that there is this poem which talks about the Taruni, the young women of Braj, looking at the male form. I think that also is an interesting one. I would have to say that remember that in both cases, the person who wrote them is supposed to be a man.
Yes. But I mean, that also raises some interesting questions, which we'll come to in a minute. But I was also wondering if you could tell us, what are the other kind of evocations and forms of desire that we hear women especially speaking in these songs?
So most of the songs and many of the compositions are by men, and this tradition of the male taking on the female voice while writing poetry or while creating compositions continues to this date. Even male Vagyakars or composers in the Hindustani classical tradition continue to write like this. So it's interesting that you don't find too many poems where Krishna pines for Radha or desires her. You do find, and those that you find are written by men. But there are, there's a deep sense of loss, for example, that is described in a lot of the poetry that we sing both in Khayal and Tumri. There's almost a restlessness, but also very magnificent restlessness, when not just the sight of the beloved is not possible, but when the touch, when being with the lover is not possible. And in Tumri you find a lot of that. So for example, there is an old Tumri. Can I sing a few lines to you? So this is in Khamaj. So it goes Raat 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 Piya bin नींद ना आई रे तड़प तड़प दिन रैना गवाई रात पिया bin neend. So see, there is, I hate to verbalize because I feel the music should really say it, but in the manner in which it has been composed, can you see that there is the movement in the music? And even if you were not to know the words, there's a kind of tossing and turning in the melodic composition itself, which is giving a sense of this restlessness, of this deep, passionate desire. It's celebrating the absence in the music, but in a sense, it's celebrating the fact, the restlessness that arises from it. I'm sorry, I'm not being clear about it, but the manner in which it is sung. If you sing Raat, what does Raat signify? Of course, it's night. And of course, you can also miss a loved one during the day. You don't need to wait for the night. But the night also holds a certain sense of time when you are together in privacy. And so how do you express that? You can, of course, say Raat piya. You can sing that. But Raat, the modulation of the voice, Ra, just the manner in which there is a tenderness to it, there is an intimacy to it, and that is pointing towards those moments of seclusion and privacy which are spent with the beloved. I think, that's why I find it so important to study the lyrics very carefully, and you can spend a lifetime doing that. Possibly 20 years ago, when I was much younger, perhaps this aspect may not have attracted me so much. But as I journey with the music, as I live my life with the music, all of these fabulous aspects of sound and how to use sound consciously to create this mahal, that's a very important aspect that I'm learning and enjoying and discovering as I go along.
It's beautiful. It was beautiful to listen to you talk about it. And actually, it's also a kind of solace to hear about it, because I think that what comes through, and especially when you spoke about the composition and the restlessness, the bechani of that moment, it's as if to say the musical note and the musical composition and these songs, they give tangibility to something which is intangible, which remains unnoticed about human experience. One of the things that happens when we try to talk about the meaning of experience, the meaning of social relationships, is that people often get flattened into one identity, as if to say they're full human beings, right? That if I'm poor, I do not also have desire. And that, the way in which art recognizes that humanity, that it becomes a form of gathering knowledge about what it means to be a human being at some level.
Yes.
And so for we need that art to tell us that our experiences matter, that this restlessness and this desire, which I'm able to say to myself, even if my circumstances may constrain me in many ways. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is that often we talk about, say, okay, what would signify a liberated conversation about womanhood, and then that there would be a construction of a type of woman who is a perfect ideal of liberation. And if a woman does not have certain kinds of rights, we believe that she has no possibility of experiencing a liberatedness. But perhaps in her sexual desire, we do not know. Perhaps she does experience liberation. And so these kinds of this knowledge about art and the knowledge inside art, in a way, I think it tells us that politics is not so simple, and freedom is also so simple.
Yes, absolutely. And also, the other thing that I want to say is that there is no one way of interpreting all of this. So when I'm singing Raat Piya Bin Neend Aayi, I learn, virtually hundreds of classical musicians would know this composition. And it's not necessary that they would agree with what I am saying. It's possible that I may not agree with their interpretation either. But the fact remains that this quality, this interpretative quality, exists, where the person who's making that experience, who's sharing, who's actually transmitting that experience to you through the song and the music making, is doing so with a certain intent and consciousness, but you may actually interpret it in a completely different way. So I may feel that the manner in which I am talking about, or I'm singing Raat Piya Bin Neend Aayi, tadap tadap, the way I'm using my voice in a particular way, I feel I'm conveying that sense of restlessness, of agony, and yet somebody else may find it deeply melancholic. So I like that quality, I like the fact that with all the sincerity and integrity and virtuosity and experience available to you, you may be saying, here's my Raat Piya Bin Neend Aayi. But perhaps the person who's receiving it could fall into deep melancholia, because maybe they're identifying it with a different way, and maybe they're not even identifying with it at all. And I like that quality about particularly this form of music and this art, it isn't necessary for us to hit bullseye each time, and what we consider bullseye. So the bullseye itself actually can be different for different people.
Yeah, there's a quality of democracy in it.
Yes.
We take away what we are ready to take away at a given moment, either from learning it or from hearing it, actually, from what you said, right?
Yes.
And because I think, like, for many of us who are not knowledgeable about music and how music works, would it be possible for you to maybe give us another example of how this kind of, like, the notes and the way the music is structured creates a feeling in us?
When I was learning Tumri, which is considered largely a kind of Shringar-oriented form, which is steered not so much by the rules of Ragdari, but more steered in the direction of improvisation and elaboration by the Sahitya. And for that reason, it is considered, remember that it's already been tainted for that reason, that it's called semi-classical. I mean, how can it be semi-classical? It is anchored very firmly in the rag tradition, so it is classical music. But one of the reasons for which it is called semi-classical is because it is liberal about rag rules. So in the conveying of the meaning of the Sahitya, if you wish to move out of the rag, you have the license to do so. And also its association with the courtesan and the Tawayaf tradition has led to its being given a kind of lower place in the hierarchy. Can you imagine, we're talking of hierarchies in art, in music. So it's considered semi-classical, and a lot of male ustads and pandits, great scholars and great gurus of Hindustani classical music, would teach women Tumri, but would never sing it themselves because it was considered lower art in that sense. And yet, it's one of those forms which really gives you the possibility of the experience can be from the sensual to the sublime, as my Guru Naina Devi ji once said in a lecture demonstration on Tumri. And at the risk of going on a little too long, I wanted to share an anecdote with you, which I heard from Naina Devi ji when she was explaining this aspect of Tumri to us. She said, for a very, very famous Kathak dancer who was known for his abhinay, and he was also addicted to alcohol. So very often he would come to performances completely sozzled and unable to perform. But he was invited evidently to Rashtrapati Bhavan to perform at Rashtrapati Bhavan for another very accomplished female danseuse from South India, also known for her fabulous abhinay. And Naina ji was asked to somehow manage this because she knew both artists very well. And she said that she asked this great dancer that, look, this is another very, very accomplished person you're going to dance for, and at Rashtrapati Bhavan, you can't possibly arrive there in a state of intoxication. You must please give your best. And as often happens with artists, they do what they want. He arrived, it seems, in quite a tattered kurta pajama, eyes absolutely bloodshot, high as a kite, and he started what she described as this very chalta hua dadra. Atariya pe chadh gayi, hoy gayi badnaam. Now this is like, Atariya, you're on the rooftop, earning a bad name for yourself, badnaam ho gaye. And the most kind of slightly raunchy, sleazy rendition of this dadra. And then Naina ji says that I didn't know where to look because this was going on at Rashtrapati Bhavan, supposedly. And she said suddenly this man dressed in tattered, stained clothes, really intoxicated, dancing to this very chalta hua dadra. Suddenly, he turned it into an experience of absolute profound sublimity, because Atariya pe chad gaye, it was a description of the surrender, where you don't care two hoots whether society treats you with respect or not. You are giving yourself to him or to the divine or to your lover or to your passion in life, to your music, to your art, whatever. And so it was such a great anecdote to really explain that. And there's one dadra which is very beautiful. It's also been sung in a film, and the great Begum Akhtar also sang it just beautifully. But it goes like this. Sundar sari mori maike me mail bhai kalai ke jaibe gavanva hai ram kalai ke jaibe gavanva. We've all heard this dadra, and we've also heard the filmy version, I think. What does it say? That my beautiful sari is stained. Why is it stained? Because of the pleasures that it has seen and endured. Now, when I come face to face with my husband or with the person I am giving myself to, what explanation am I going to give? Now, on the face of it, this is a very human experience, and a human experience of which society doesn't really give you license for this kind of experience. And yet it is being used constantly. And similar lyrics are being used because of their familiarity. The human experience itself is so familiar to all of us, to try and give you a picture of a much more profound experience. So Tumri Dadra constantly plays with this lovely toggling between the human and the divine experience. And it's been there all along. So it's so common to experience this when you're learning Tumri, as are other concepts, for example, of transience, of time flying by. So there's, part of Tumri Dadra also includes seasonal song forms like Kajri, Hori, Cheti, etc., which are sung during specific seasons. And there's one Cheti that says, Ha binat binat kumhala gaile Rama Juhi ke phulwa. So as you pluck the juhi from the tree, from the plant, in that moment itself it starts wilting away. Now this could be, it could mirror so many experiences. It is about transience. It is about the pleasure of experiencing the fragrance of that flower in that moment, which is also transient and which goes away. And then translating that experience into about life, about love, about pleasure, about that momentary experience, which then you carry memories of. And sometimes the memories may not always be pleasant. So I think here's another aspect of looking at lyrics as a vehicle to yourself first understand the many subtleties and nuances of human experience and of pleasure, and then try and use voice, rag, tal, melody, elaboration to, without saying all of what I'm saying today, to try and share it with the listener.
I think that to go back to the earlier point that we were discussing, that is its great democracy, its inclusiveness, like its heterogeneity, that that what it means to me, it may not mean to you. And in many ways, like the fundamental idea of politics, of people coming together with their differences and still trying to be on some equal plane, is accommodated only, I think, inside art, which just says that there's always another version.
Yeah.
Whatever you think is going on, what should be or can be possible. But also, as you were telling the stories, I thought it's such an interesting history, the way that anything which is pleasurable is often demoted, right? And I mean, although there are these tremendous traditions of pleasure and evocations of human sensuality and or just the sensory human experience, is just like bhar bhar ke it's present in our arts. And yet there is a continuous hierarchy where if it's for pleasure, it's a little bit less.
Yes.
Like if it's classical, meaning it's absolutely within an orthodoxy, so to speak, and I'm using the word very loosely, of course, which is a contradiction to loosely use the word orthodoxy, but okay. So, but the idea, if it is in a structure and that structure is not going to change, then it is somehow at a higher plane. And the moment that we'll play with the form a little bit, we'll open it out and we'll say, we'll accommodate our experience before we accommodate the form, which is what you're describing about Tumri.
Yes.
We'll change the form because we want to say what we are feeling.
Yes.
And the form needs to change to accommodate our feeling, then suddenly it becomes not so great. And actually it parallels that idea of control versus giving space to individuals to make meaning out of their situation. So
yes.
And of course, as you also point that one quick way, we also see how that many of these stories that are in the songs, many of these emotions, feelings, and even the actual form of the music has kind of continued into Hindi film music, right? Like in a much simplified form, but the same ideas, we continue to enjoy them in Hindi film music, and that too is considered to be somehow nichle star ki cheez because it is only for fun, and
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, again, I mean, a lot of folk music in any case, and also Ragdari compositions have come into Hindi film music. And in a sense, we enjoy them without the elaboration that is so much a part of the Hindustani music tradition. But really, I think also we tend to categorize and push towards cliches a lot, whether it is with film music or whether it is with Hindustani classical music, and within Hindustani classical music, whether it is Tumri Dadra or Khayal. I don't know for what reason, we love cliches. So very often Tumri Dadra, today's understanding of Tumri Dadra would mean a song that is supposedly lighter and therefore easier to understand. Whereas the concepts that we are talking about are very much a part of the Tumri Dadra tradition also. And these are not light by any chance. I mean, these can be deeply profound as well. So I think, yes, that there is this tendency for us to put into neat little compartments. Sometimes I feel a little scared of these categories. I mean, they're great for a music store where you might not want to ramble around a huge store looking for the music of your choice. Then it's convenient to go film music, okay, right here, Bollywood right here, classical right here, Carnatic here, then it's okay. But in art, there can't be these neat little compartments with tight little lids, or which you have to pry open, and only then the gin comes out of it and then starts polluting everything. It's never been like that in art, and thank God for that, or thank pleasure for that.
Yeah, I always call it the real estate approach to meaning, because it's like, okay, if the thing is here, then it's good. Like if it's in South Bombay, it must be good, and if it's in Ghatkopar, it won't be good. But also what you're describing is kind of what people also term queerness, that it doesn't belong to any category. Art, feminism, some of these things are inherently queer because they're continuously moving forward on the basis of experience rather than some kind of predetermined idea of what should or shouldn't be. But I'm going to make a slightly literal transition to ask you that, do we actually see within the traditions, queerness? Like, do we see same-sex relationships? Are they present in old songs, old poems that you have worked with?
Well, a lot of compositions written by men for their gurus are written in the same nature of a almost a love song, you know. However, I can't pronounce them as being part of, let's say, queer literature, because I do not know, and I don't have the I can't sort of come to a conclusion on for that reason. But yes, you know, I remember that for a concert that I did some years ago, there is the form called Rekti, which talks of same-sex love, and where several poets have written Rekti, and I found one delightful one in the very well-known book authored by Salim Kidwai and Ruth, and I think that's one that I chose to sing. You won't find Rekti being sung very often, in at least in Hindustani classical music, but since my learning, my vocabulary is that of Hindustani classical music, I tend to fall back upon that vocabulary when I sing, and I did work on one Rekti by Rangeen. By Rangeen. Yeah, why not? Let me just get to it. So this is चोटी पे तेरी सांप की है लहर दुगाना, खाती हूँ तेरे वास्ते मैं जहर दुगाना. Your plait is a wriggling serpent to dogana, and the dogana word itself actually conveys a certain meaning. So let me try and sing this for you. चोटी पे तेरी सांप की है लहर दोगाना, चोटी पे तेरे सांप की है लहर दोगाना, खाती हूँ तेरे वास्ते मैं जहर दोगाना, चोटी पे तेरे सांप की है लहर दोगाना.
For those who don't know, actually, the term dogana is often two women who are lovers address each other as dogana, right? So yeah, I think it's kind of great to be able to discover all of these things, to know that it exists, to sort of expand your consciousness through it. Because on the one hand, the fact that men are writing songs which are to be sung by women, but perhaps they were meant for other men, or perhaps not. The fact that we don't know is in itself the potency of it, I guess.
Yes.
But there were also women writing songs, were there not also? I mean, like Mirabai and others who were writing songs. And
yes, and those songs were full of a lot of passion. Again, they fall into a very popular and a very highly respected, often referred to corpus of bhakti literature. I mean, whatever you want to describe, very often people fall back on bhakti literature to describe that experience. And yet, Paromita, if you think of the manner in which Mirabai has been sung by some of the most iconic singers in our film world, as well as our classical traditions, it's quite fascinating to see that by and large Mirabai has been sung, she's been orally also turned into that archetypal, typical the plaster of Paris Mira statues that we see very often of a woman, holding a stringed instrument, either a dotara, iktara, or maybe a tanpura, dressed in pristine white, or then in jogia robes, or and her eyes are closed in bliss, and there is a peace about the entire, the way she is represented iconic in these either paintings or statues or casts or whatever. She has been cast in that mold in popular imagination. But I'm not so sure that she could have been so peaceful through her life. I mean, for one, just imagine the fiery quality of this woman's strength of character. I mean, I'm a person who's sung music all my life. This is my livelihood. Also my profession. But if you were to tell me to run down the stairs today at the next Chaurasta and start singing in abandon, would I be able to do it? No, I would feel self-conscious, I think, I need a stage, or I need a place where I sit down and sing. But this lady was singing in abandon and getting into trouble for that. That's the legend, isn't it, about Meera? There was conspiracy. People tried to murder her in different ways, and yet she was not backing down, So that's her story by and large. Then how could she have sung only with this kind of complete bliss and peace? At some point she must have wanted to tear her heart out and sing, no? And I think very often we don't hear Mirabai like that. Some of the most beautiful renditions that I have heard are those of, let's say, M.S. Subbalakshmi ji or of Lata ji, who sung Meera beautifully, or then even Juthika Roy, or then you have other classical singers like Omkar Nath Thakur singing Jogi Mat Ja, Mat Ja, Mat Ja, very dramatically. And yet that, because of the form itself in which we are singing, which is largely based on classical music or folk music, we are conforming to that. We are bringing in a sense of conforming to rag, tal, etc. But I'm not so sure that we can do that with Meera's poetry. And so for one verse, I couldn't stop myself. I know that a lot of people are going to kill me for trying to sing Meera like this, but
won't be us.
You'd find asylum for me now. So I like to sing this pad like this. Sajana, Sajana, bega ghar aiye ho, Sajana, bega ghar aiye ho, आदि अंत के मीत हो, सजन बेगा घर आइए हो. I sing this like this because I feel I can't hold back in this particular pad. There is a sense of, can't you hear me? I long for you, How dare you not be there for me? Almost a sense of, anger also. And I feel, yes, this may not be an acceptable rendition, but at least in some of Mirabai's compositions, I feel like singing them like this.
It is amazing, because I also think that, I mean, I have a friend who made a film on Mirabai, and I once said to her, because I worked on the film, that, you know, I know that she's supposed to not be loving her husband, and he's a villain of the piece, but she's addressing him in so many of her poems that I wonder what
Yes.
I felt that she wants to be understood, which is actually maybe not necessarily by her husband, maybe by the world at large, which the person who doesn't want to fit in necessarily to the pre-existing whatever is available for us has to be more passionate in expressing themselves so that people can understand this is what I am, right? And
Yes.
I think that you really are capturing that part of it, and it's because it's a passionate urgency for herself. It's not.
Yes.
Yeah.
And unless it's a passionate urgency for herself, she cannot write with this sense of urgency. And I feel that that's the reason why maybe it's a good idea. I'm not saying this is the only and best way to convey the urgency. For me, I feel it doesn't matter if my voice cracks when I'm singing those high notes. Let it be like that, because when you really desperately call out to somebody, are you waiting to see whether you're sounding pretty, and or whether the mics are not going haywire, and you don't really care. And a lot of musical forms also, where, for example, let's say kirtan, or for example kavali, when the singers try to convey this sense of calling, pukar, they're not bothered about voices really becoming shrill. I mean, in normal circumstances, we would say this is a shrill voice or this is a harsh voice. These are the adjectives we could possibly use. But at that moment, you are not bothered. You want to call out. You want the person you're calling out to hear. And if that means that your voice breaks, so be it.
Yeah. I need to be seen by the one we wish would see us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, all I don't, this manner of looking at art, at stories, at people, at poems, actually makes me think that very often we don't, when we're talking about especially women and the representation of women, or in fact any identities which have been marginalized by the powers that be, meaning the privileged of a society, we don't look at expression. Right? We want them, I mean, we want them to say all the right things to prove that it's worth taking them seriously. Whereas actually what you have described in the course of this conversation is a kind of, there's a spectrum of expressions. These expressions, maybe they are by women, maybe they are by men on behalf of women, which doesn't necessarily mean that those men haven't heard women or observed women. I mean, so it's not like one thing is canceling another, but it all exists in some polyglot way. But it feels at this particular moment, we talk a lot about the importance of women's freedoms. And, we talk about violence against women, we talk about women's difficulties. And yet it feels as if we don't take into account all of the diversity of expression that makes us human, right? And I wanted to talk a little bit, if it's possible, about a landmark piece of work that you were part of, which is Man Ke Manjeere, which in a sense, I mean, in a sense, if we think of it, Man Ke Manjeere is the first piece of work in the mainstream talking about women's rights in a particular kind of way, or the story of a woman who made a life for herself. And it actually, to my mind, inaugurated an entire trend of people talking about women and women's stories and violence and overcoming violence and triumph, in a sense. So a kind of popular language of social change and women came from it. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the process of coming to that work, and maybe also because, one of the most fantastic things about art and feminism, I feel, again, is that it's a thing that keeps changing. It keeps shifting. We do something, we learn something from it, we become something else, then we become something else. And then at a certain moment, we turn back and look at what we did, and we think it was important for that time. And then we also see certain other things that were part of it that we didn't see at that time. So I wondered if you would want to revisit Manke Manjire and talk about that work.
Yeah, and you described the the whole experience with Manke Manjire already, because that our perception of what we've done and what we've experienced at a particular time may keep changing as we go along. So I really truly find that Manke Manjire was a very valuable experience for me. I had already done Apke Sawan in around 1999. And it was in 2000 that Mallika Dutt asked me to be a part of Manke Manjire. And I knew that art can be used in this manner to give a social message, to give even a political message. I knew that because I'd grown up in a home where all this was discussed. I had seen Faiz Sahab in Allahabad, I'd heard him recite, and I knew that this is a possibility, but I hadn't really participated myself in a project of this nature. And I just thought it was such a fabulous idea to use popular music and the format of music video to really convey a very powerful message. So it was a fascinating experience for me. Interestingly, while we were recording Manke Manjire in 2000, Anish and I decided to get married. And the date for our marriage was 9th March 2000. It was right in the middle of recording Manke Manjire. And so I had told Mallika, Shantanu, Moitra, everybody involved in the project, that I need a day off on the 9th of March. And so everybody said, okay, fine, we'll schedule something else on that day. We'll schedule another musician coming in to dub. And so I didn't show up on the 9th of March, and I showed up then on the 10th of March. And Mallika asked me, so how did your concert go? Because everybody assumed that I had taken leave for a concert. I said, well, it wasn't really a concert or a performance. I was getting married. And that's where I was right in the middle of Manke Manjire. But to go back to the project and its importance for me, I think those were songs that I really enjoyed being a part of. I really enjoyed the fact that Shantanu and Mallika included many women's voices. And there were women's voices both from the kind of playback sphere, which was Mahalakshmi Iyer, Antara Chaudhary, but there were also Diwali Ben Bhil from Gujarat, fantastic Gujarati folk singer. There was also Rukma Bai from the Rajasthani tradition, and I really think that those were important decisions that were taken. I don't understand video at all, and though I quite enjoyed myself in Apke Sawan, any video that I appeared in thereafter, I found myself unable to lose my inhibitions, and so I found myself looking very self-conscious and sort of jarring the narrative. It seemed such a unnecessary thing to take away from the story and have me staring into space or smiling into space and singing something. So I wasn't a part of the video of Manke Manjire. And at that point of time, it was wonderful that the story of Shamim Pathan, her life story, was actually adapted for the music video. The story of her very abusive marriage and this woman deciding to take on the unconventional profession of being a taxi driver was adapted into the music video for the title track of Manke Manjire. But looking back on Manke Manjire and several other projects that I was later a part of, I'm wondering why we always, particularly with popular music, why do we always look at the advertising world or the film world to make these videos? Why do they need, I'm not saying that they need to look a particular way, but then they become how should I say, the palla of the sari fluttering, but fluttering very neatly with a fan placed under it, so that it looks like a, lovely palla in the breeze. I think there's a sense of cosmeticization and a sense of, none of which I am against per se, but I think it needs to be more real also. And this kind of, once again, I say this with a sense of dread because I may be misunderstood. I'm not saying that the advertising world doesn't understand creativity. It understands it, they have their own perspective. And for somebody who doesn't understand video, how dare I say whether this is, but then I'm Indian, and then I can even comment on cricket and film and everything. So why the hell shouldn't I? So, but really, I think sometimes for work of this nature, maybe it was, now I feel it was too slick in a particular way, and I'm also mortified that that several of the people who were involved in that in that entire production have taken very different paths and are perhaps not the greatest friends of women's dreams or people who really care about women's dreams. Their journeys have gone very differently, and I wonder whether that's something that perhaps we should think of when next. I mean, in popular music, I don't see an album like that coming in the near future. Now, of course, it has to be multi-starrers with every person singing half a line or 2 words, never singing together, by the way. So the unity is shown, but we're all in different studios, singing at different times, and we wouldn't even give the time of day to each other. But in the video, we appear, in splendid landscape, but it's never really together. Ask all that group of people to come together and sing, and you're going to have a massive fight on set. Because somebody will say, my nose is only showing, why is that person's face showing? Why is that artist shown for 35 seconds longer than me? So all of this does happen, as we know. And I think perhaps we need to get out of that mold and look at in another creative way to perhaps film and present these music videos and these albums, if there's possibly a space for them. I don't see a space for them now.
No, I think that, it's what you said is very fascinating, because I do think that in a way, the form, which is very potent when it comes once and then becomes a format, it slowly strips the format strips what is inside it of meaning. And after that, you can just replace one woman with another woman with another issue, but the structure never changes.
Yeah.
And so it continuously communicates only one message. And perhaps what happened subsequently is it became the kind of way of communicating about women's experiences. And it's not messy. What you're saying is that neatness of the image, on the one hand, it goes back to a certain representation of women, which is quite gendered, even while claiming to be about, a completely different life. Yes. Away from those gendered constrictions. And then it also just determines the narrative has always got to be linear, like after defeat there is victory. But in fact, the many stories that you've told us in the other kinds of traditions of art and expression, actually they're about everyday experience, and the fact that in our experiences we are many things, and in art we claim a power for ourselves.
Yes.
If the world denies us that power, we assert ourselves. So I think the fact that you touch on advertising filmmakers as the people we turn to for amplification of our message sometimes means it's all amplification, no message. And it actually just meets the needs of the market rather than the needs of the person. I think more, and it's sad that when you say that, I don't think an album like that would come out again, because I think it is I think you said a very sort of amazing thing about the atomized way in which music is created today, with people always being separate, and video is created with very many famous people, but all in a separate place. So the coming together, which is the exact opposite of how you described, that you sing a song a certain way, And actually many different people are united by the experience of listening, but
Yes,
may take away something quite different.
quite
So
different.
it's actually the reverse of what art
Yeah,
does, is
yeah,
what this kind of formatted video does. So it's a crazy journey which seems to be about liberation, but is in many ways about bandhana
huh.
and framing it, putting us inside a frame. But I still want to say that although Man Ke Manjeera is a very landmark video moment, and I personally also love music videos, and I'm the generation that grew up on music videos and wish to spend the rest of my life either picturizing songs or making music videos. But you also do not anymore see songs picturized in movies the way you did once, right? Lip
Yes,
sync songs where we sing our emotions, those
yes,
two are kind of like a proscenium of
yeah,
dance performance. But still, I want to say that the one most iconic video moment for me precedes Man Ke Manjeera, and it is Apke Sawan. Because I think when a generation of people saw you in Apke Sawan, it was very powerful in a very different way. That we saw somebody singing with complete abandon. In fact, doing the thing you said that Mirabai does, but I don't think I can do it. Wearing a sari, beautiful, but not in the cosmeticized way, and completely yourself. And I think the powerful impact it had was not that I wanted to copy you, but I thought like, oh my God, look at this person being themselves, how awesome they are. Maybe I'll be awesome too if I can be myself. That's
yes,
the possibility.
yes,
As opposed to, I can only be awesome if I look like the girl in the picture. I
yes.
mean, I do think that Apke Sawan was that thing for many, many, many people, right? And so I cannot thank you enough for having done it.
I must thank Pradeep Sarkar for including me in it and insisting. I mean, I had said, I think I would have I would have gone towards stand up, I think, had I appeared in anything else but my sari and being myself. But really, I think he was very comforting about that, about not forcing me. And I think there was an energy on the set which conveyed itself in the video also. We really had fun.
Great. I want to ask just one last question. I know that we have gone over time, and you've been very generous with your time. Um, I want to ask about your own journey as an artist, where you've been so sort of free with the way that you have gone from space to space, where, of course, we all know that you're a classical musician, but you're also many other things, and you're very comfortable experimenting. I don't want to use the word experimenting, journeying into other spaces, taking what you want, going where you like, and it's a tremendously free-spirited, even though I hate the term free-spirited because all these things already have acquired meanings, but
Yeah.
freeness, there's a freeness and a liberatory quality to the fact that you go and you make meaning wherever you want to make meaning. But I don't know if that is easy. And I wondered if you could speak about it a little bit.
Everything comes with a price, of course, and I think very often if you're feeling if you're optimistic at a particular moment, you feel that it's been wonderful. I think for me, I've really enjoyed the fact that I've taken a lot of advantage of the times that I live in. Today I live in a time when I can listen to music from any part of the world, right sitting here in my cloistered in my pandemic hit room. I can still listen to music from Mali to any place, And so I think as an artist, as a person studying music, it's a fascinating time to be alive in. And I've really enjoyed that. Also, I think both my upbringing, my parental upbringing, as well as my musical upbringing, has been with people who were really open to many, many influences. My parents were teachers of English literature at the University of Allahabad, crazy about music and the arts, about poetry, literature. And we grew up in this home where, we were being encouraged without any insistence on when you're going to perform. But engaging with the arts was important. We took part in theater, we took part in all the weddings that took place with neighbors, family. We were dancing at those, and we were given ample opportunity to engage with the arts in different ways. And then, Paromita, my mother made me this amazing offer after I graduated. She said, I can make out that music is what really fascinates you. You're happiest with music. You don't have to now if you've graduated, now you don't have to start getting admission into a postgraduate course. If you want to do that, fine. If you want to do music, it's time for you to discover and take a decision about whether you want to make a commitment to music or not. And if you do, then you don't need to go the regular graduation, post-graduation, etc. way. You must concentrate on studying music. But remember, don't complain after you made the decision. I'll be around to hear the complaint, but I'm not going to do anything about it. And she gave me the opportunity to study music and make a full-time commitment to it. That was quite amazing. And I can't thank her enough. So I said, suddenly this was a revelation. Yeah, of course, that's what I want to do. And so I started learning Hindustani classical music, and you know that I've had the opportunity to learn from some of the greatest scholar musicians. Over the years, I remained extremely curious about various forms of music. Remember, I was a Allahabad girl coming to Delhi, and suddenly in Delhi I was also able to see Martha Graham's ballet company. I was listening to troops coming from all over the world. There was this complete fascinating discovery of different kinds of music, dance, arts for me. And then I got invited to work with dancers, to work with filmmakers, to create some music for them, even add jingles, etc. And even with, I think I've composed the title track of Fauji. You know that serial, of course, Shah Rukh Khan. So I got all these opportunities, and it was such a fabulous experience, but there were also a lot of bitter experiences, and particularly when it comes to the business of music and things like intellectual property rights, which we are not trained for. Nothing in our talim, our conventional training of Hindustani classical music, prepares us for the business of music. We are brought up to say that bhai paise ka kuch, we are making art, isme theek hai, whatever. And you find yourself almost feeling abashed when to say that this is what I want to be paid. If you're a woman, and if you say, this is what I want to be paid, and not just paid, I want these terms. I want to travel like this. I want to stay in a clean, neat place, whatever. You are considered difficult. You are even considered difficult if you say, I want an audio engineer who is qualified to handle sound for me. How unreasonable is that? For somebody who is working with sound, my voice, my music, should I not want sound? Tum kaun ho? कल की लड़की, तुम औरत, तुम हमारे यहाँ तो पंडित सो इन सो भी आके इसी दरी पे बैठ के गा के गए हैं. उनको तो ऑडियो इंजीनियर नहीं चाहिए था, बट मुझे चाहिए. This is not considered at all acceptable. And of course the porousness of my experience, the fact that I enjoy being with different forms of music. Although I also want to say that I'm totally a Hindustani classical person. When I sing my rag, Yaman, Malkons, whatever, I do not fool around. I do not try and sing in, one little bit of Sikho na Naino ki bhasha when I'm singing Khamaj. I do not try and do that, And yet, certainly a lot of people, maybe they will not come out and say it to my face, some do also, and will say, oh, she has to take a decision whether she wants to be a classical musician or whether she wants to be a popular musician. This moving from one place, who are you to tell me what I need to do? You can sit in your little compartments and do what you like. I don't feel that people who stay with a particular gharana need to be criticized. I don't find their supposedly orthodox view, because I don't think gharana is orthodox. So I think it gives you the freedom to find your own voice, and there are ample examples of that. But yes, the powers that be, the cultural czars and czarinas, will certainly want to bring you down several notches, and they will not do so if you were a Khandani male musician. That I am not a Khandani musician and I am a woman gives the scribes also the right to say whatever they want, you know. But you know, I've always felt, what more do I want? I have the great, look at the life I've been able to live with the music. अब क्या इस सब में पढ़ना है? You know, if somebody says I don't sing classical music, well, fine. There's so many wonderful singers. Go listen to them. कोई बात नहीं. And if somebody says I only sing Kabir bhajans, well, fine. आप मेरा कबीर भजन सुन लो. What a gift it is in my life that I've been able to have the companionship of music and be able to sing despite not being from a Khandani background, and to have found a lot of appreciation from a lot of people. So if there are some brickbats and some raised eyebrows, forget the many hairlines in which those eyebrows can disappear.
Well, I mean, you are the embodiment of where pleasure can take you, actually. The new places that pleasure makes in the world also. If we just had the self-confidence to follow that pleasure. So thank you for being a difficult woman. What can I say? Can we end with a song?
Yes, why not? So let me try and sing this. I'm going to sing you a song which I learned from my mother. And my mother was from Uttarakhand, and she taught me this song. It's a woman's song meant to be sung at the birth of a child, where she says to a parrot called Sua that go out and invite everybody, because see, I've had the experience of having this child. And it goes like this. Sua re Sua ban khandi Sua ratnari aankhi najar teri baaki हरिया तेरो गात हो लाल तेरी ठूंड रे सुआ नगरी तू न्योता दिया रे सुआ नगरी तू न्योता दिया सुआ रे सुआ बन खंडी सुआ रत्नारी आँखी नजर तेरी बाकी हरिया तेरो गात हो लाल तेरी ठूंड रे सुआ नगरी तू न्योता दिया रे सुआ नगरी तू न्योता दिया.
Hi, everybody. Gosh. So, welcome to Shubhaji. IRL, kind of. It's virtual in real time, even if you're not physical. You know, we recorded the conversation because we weren't sure that Shubhaji would have access to good internet today. But I have to say that talk about digital pleasures, because at least for me, I got the fun of listening to the conversation that I had at that time was work. So I was being attentive, and now I could just soak in the beauty of it. So actually it really worked out. So thank you. But thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm not sure. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm not sure whether the internet is going to be cooperative or not over here, but it was an absolute pleasure speaking to you, Paromita, and thank you for not just asking those questions, but also when you summed up, you did it so much better than what I said, that I was almost feeling like, you know, I'm hearing a nice piece of poetry and saying, oh my goodness, this is what I would have liked to say. So thank you for that, and thank you to everybody who has listened to us.
Yeah, it was like listening to a song, the whole conversation actually. And I think like there were many questions, and in the middle I said to my colleague, excuse me, Shubha Mudgal is answering the questions in chat. What's going on? So, but it's but it's good because some of those questions are very, very focused on the classical traditions, and there are lots of questions. I'm going to pick and choose a few because I know time is not unlimited for us. But I want to start by reading this story that, where has it gone? Vinita's comment. Well, maybe it's been answered. But I'm going to read it out for the audience. Yes, because it made me tear up when I read it. Apke Savan is the song of my first love. My boyfriend and I would call each other in our little steel township internal phones whenever it played on TV. We wouldn't talk in the fear of being found out by our parents, but Apke Savan will always evoke the memory and that two teenagers could express their love to the song. And which also, I mean, it's like the themes of our conference.
Yes.
I mean, they are coming out that when there's music, there's pleasure. It gives young people so much space to express. So yeah, so I just wanted to read that. And then I'm going to ask a question which is kind of related and opposite to our conversation, which is somebody wanting to know what are your favorite popular Hindi film songs?
You know, I listen to a lot of film songs, but I've listened more to songs that were made several decades ago. And one that I really love and enjoy is Lataji's rendition of Piya To Se Naina Lage Re in the movie Guide, which is of course acted out by Wahida Rehman, and it's one of my all-time favorites. Another one is Ghar Aaja Ghera Hai Badra Sanwariya, Nadi Nare Na Jao Shyam Paiyan Padu. All these songs. So I'm sorry, I'm not referring to songs that were made and produced recently, but these are really my sort of golden film songs, which I've cherished and listened to many times and still continue to listen to.
So if you, those who asked if you don't know the songs, it's a good reason to go check them out because they are beautiful songs. There's a question from Shika Jhingan, and I'm so relieved that there are these questions about Tumri and Dadra, because I was thinking like I am so ignorant. And of course, Mood Hake went off to do a conversation without knowing anything about classical music. So I'm relieved that some people have come and bachawed my large by asking. I wanted to ask a question about performance of Tumri or Dadra, where the lyrics are about desire or erotic pleasure. The conventional stage performance style in public domain in classical and semi-classical demands a somber style of performance, which was very different in the mehfils with bhav or making eye contact with the listeners. There was an involvement of bodily gestures. Do you feel that this is some kind of a loss? How do you look at these transformations, even though these happened several decades ago?
Well, Tumri is said to have evolved as a form that was associated very much with dance and with abhinay. I think it is a good idea for anybody who wants to study Tumri and Dadra to also try and learn about Kathak and the whole idea of doing abhinay to Tumri. In the past, as Shikha has already said, the Tumri singer and dancer were the same person. So somebody who presented Tumri could also dance and could also sing. But I also think that, for example, great iconic performers of Tumri, like let's say Srimati Siddheshwari Devi, who was not dancing to the music. Neither was somebody like, let's say, Begum Akhtar or Rasulan Bai. I think they still showed us that once again, the form itself need not be in a watertight space where you would not be a good performer of Tumri if you don't dance to it also. But I think as a student of Tumri, it was important for me to also be, I know this sounds quite incredible, but I studied Kathak for many years. And in fact, the association of Kathak and Tumri was what brought me to vocal music also. But I think it's necessary to explore all of this for those students who feel the urge to do so. Otherwise, there is the possibility that even when you are seated on stage and you're not dancing, you perhaps may not even look up and gesticulate too much. You can still convey the sense of passion, the kind of sensuality that is inherent in the form itself. I really feel that there is no one way of presenting Tumri, and each one of us must, and we do, look for our own ways of presenting Tumri. I personally find it useful to also look at dance and to perhaps not even with a sense of actually wanting to put that into practice, but just understand movement, just understand footwork, and then move towards certain parts of Tumri performance where Laggi Ladi, etc. is played by the tabla. Because if you don't understand that association, you may think this is a technical thing and just treat it with a kind of, okay, this is part of Tumri, and skim over it. But it's always good to know more about each aspect.
One person has said, this is not a question, but listening to you talk about music feels like a warm hug in a cold, cold world.
We need lots of warmth, and so I'm glad you thought that. And I hope we can talk more, and I hope we can talk more about, and I can listen more about this very, very important idea of love, sex, pleasure, and data.
Ragini has many questions. I'm going to pick a couple, if that's okay, Ragini. Which, when you do you think that for pleasure you need a certain vulnerability? And also, when you refer to advocates of women's freedoms turning into right-wingers, is the solution to look at more long-term ideological alignments before inviting people, artists, to participate in such interventions?
I'm sort of against sort of dictating what should be done. I feel we all have to take decisions, and very often projects of this nature are teamwork. And I feel that the people who head those do so with their own sense of wisdom and their own judgment. I feel that one can't really fault any ideology. I mean, whether it's right, left, center. How many women-friendly ideologies have we had politically? So I think just the fact that we have so few women in parliament, and we know we've been talking about this for decades now, I think that in itself says a lot. So I don't think we can blame any one ideology. And I think for any project, which is an ensemble project, we have to make wise decisions. And I guess for me, it's important to believe in what I'm singing about. If I don't believe in it, I don't think I can sing about. I try and approach each of the projects with a sense of conviction. Having said that, my own ideas about a particular issue may change with time. So I think these are very dynamic, organic aspects. And rather than sit on judgment, I would say that let's each one try and do our best with the project and hope that it communicates what we want, what we set out to.
Satya asks, hearing Shubhaji sing the bandish on the lock of hair, I am reminded of how pleasure and touch are forbidden. Touch, display of affection, desire are fantasy, the stuff of the imagination for so many of those in love or in lust. Public display of displeasure is more acceptable than PDA or love, which is meant to stay within art or Bollywood. Bollywood ka bhi pata nahi. And therefore, aren't so many of us conditioned to not receive love in our everyday?
There is a kind of a veiling over very often, but then as I said, and Paromita, after I spoke to you, remember I sent you lines from another bandish, and as I sort of thought about our conversation, I could think of so many beautiful compositions in different rags, which say Sukh kar ai, I have pleasured, and or for example, Mori choliya nasai dari re, Esori anari devara. So what are we talking about? These two lines themselves convey so much. How come this is happening with the devar, with the brother-in-law? And as I said, that the stories are packed into the music, into each line, every word, and it's for us to feel the need to explore all of this and experience the pleasure of both the exploration and the fun and the meaning of what it conveys.
This is, I mean, not a question that you can answer, but it's so funny that I'm reading it out. Not sure if Shubhaji has an answer, and it's funny in a sweet way. I mean, I'm not laughing at the question. Not sure if Shubhaji has an answer or can do anything about it, but why is the music video of Sikho Na not easily available? There is one very grainy version on YouTube. It is a lovely song and video. I think Shubhaji had censored it because she didn't like herself in it, she said.
No. I have no hold over the video. The video is put out either by the company that really commissioned the project, or then by people who have enjoyed it and recorded it and are sharing it on YouTube. I think there are several versions on YouTube, and I'm happy to share a link. I can send it to you, and perhaps if you could share it. About the graininess, I think that would depend on the technology that was used at the time. Perhaps it wasn't as high definition as is possible now. So perhaps it will still remain grainy, but I think there are several people have shared the video of Sikho Na, which was shot in Kolkata, I think in that beautiful Lahabadi in North Calcutta.
There's a lot of comments. I'll read them later and get to the questions first. I wonder if Shubhaji has personally faced any resistance during any performance for connecting intimacy to a person, but not the divine.
No, I haven't really. I just when I decide to sing, like most artists, I don't think we get into a long explanation about whether it is being sung to a person or to the divine. I think the music really conveys many meanings to many different meanings to many listeners, and to some, I mean, it just may be not pleasant enough for them, or just not interesting or riveting enough. So I think I just present the music and let it convey whatever the listeners are willing to receive. I don't really I'm not very happy speaking about the music, because I think it becomes then like a lecture demonstration, and sometimes it really breaks the kind of musical thought and the musical journey that one takes during a performance. So I haven't really faced any hostility of that nature. Perhaps also because, remember, we are part of a tradition where, as I've mentioned earlier, Shringar is very much a part of bhakti as well. So when you talk of very intimate moments that two deities share with each other, you could, that is a very accepted part of the tradition. So often you hear Radha Madho doi nahi. They are not two, they are one. Or when the exchange of clothes, for example, Rasiya ko nar banauri, cross-dressing in a sense. So I think all of this is very much a beautiful and very accepted part of our tradition. So perhaps the brickbats and the hostility didn't come to me because I'm a representative of some parts of these traditions.
But I think it also tells us maybe that, art allows us to accept so much more than we seem to accept when we literalize it or want to speak it out and label it. And I mean, the rights and wrongs of that can, of course, be debated. But I do recall going to see my first Lavani performance, and I was like in a room full of upper caste, Central Bombay audience, and the Lavani dancers were making jokes like, the singer kept saying, More Saiya gaye, Pardes, More Saiya gaye. And then one of the singers said, Saiya ke Prime Minister hamesha bahar jata rehta hai. And I was like, oh my God. Now this one, the audience was laughing and they were red with pleasure. So something about art allows us to say what's perhaps secretly in our hearts. And so, I mean, yeah, I can't imagine anybody objecting to that, is what I'm saying. Not being a singer myself, but yeah. Rituparna asks, does anything from contemporary popular music remind Shubha Mudgal, of the spontaneous pleasure and gay abandon with which she sang Apke Savan, or the way it was picturized? And when will we have a sequel to this iconic song?
I don't know if a sequel is required. I think there are lots of rain songs that have been made. There are lots of young singers who sing Apke Savan beautifully and with their own sense of abandon. And very often they're kind enough to share these with me. And I enjoy, I first of all feel thrilled that a song that was launched in 1999 is still doing the rounds with young musicians who might have been babies perhaps at that point of time. So I think I'm not sure that a sequel is required. Sequels are tricky in any case, and if there is a sequel, perhaps it should have somebody else singing and somebody else in the video, and I can sit back and say and savor, Pehli Pyar Ki Pehli Barkha, sung and presented by somebody else, while I'm losing my teeth and hobbling around with a walking stick.
It's not surprising that people remember it now, because it's the same way that you remember songs from the 50s, which you said are your favorite. You would have been so young.
Yes.
So, I mean, it tells us that we find the thing that will speak for our hearts. And because it was about rain, Arya says it's raining in Bangalore and something about the rain sets a pleasurable vibe. And Shubhaji's voice adds to this pleasure experience with Tumri. Thank you, Paro. My name is not Paromita, but I'll forgive you. But thank you, Paromita ma'am, for taking us through this sensual experience by holding our hands. Well, it's one big love fest, so that's nice. We should keep in mind who historically had access to enjoy this music and not just compose it. What do you feel about that? Sankalp Chaudhary asks.
Well, the musician community that actually made the music that we're talking about, whether it was Khayal or Tumri Dadra, was largely a community of Khanani musicians and also a community of professional women musicians who made it possible for people to enjoy the music. And there were the patrons, of course, who were from an elite ruling class or from the landed gentry later on. Historically, it's state government patronage and private patronage, sometimes corporate patronage, that has been provided to these art forms. And all of that, I guess, came with its own baggage. So that's another conversation that we should perhaps have, and it's important that those conversations continue, where we don't just sort of say that, in the past, the ruling class was providing patronage to the arts. I think artists in general have been a community that has not been able very often to stand up for its rights and demand its rights. And I think whether it was at a time when patronage came from the ruling class, or whether it's today, very often they've had to perform to a scripted kind of a score, if I might use Western and non-Indian terminology. And that continues even today. We have a diktat which says, now let's have a whole set of videos and music which spread positivity, and everybody joins that. So I think musicians who want to make art of a kind that they believe in, they've always had it difficult and will continue to do so. But that's part of the challenge, isn't it? And if you don't like that, then I guess you can just decide what suits your purpose. I really don't have a prescriptive policy, but I think art must be made independently, and it's wonderful to have people who support you. It's wonderful to have people who listen to you. But if that is going to come at the peril of losing your freedom as an artist, then I guess each one of us will have to decide what we want more, what is our priority. And I would not sit on judgment on anyone.
We're almost out of time, so I'm going to do 1.5 questions more. And obviously, the half question is misuse of my moderator privilege, will be my own. So Shannon Matthews says, growing up, I felt classical music training always expected women to embody a very fragile and demure persona to be considered a proper classical singer. Did you ever face pushback for the uninhibited style with which you sing?
No, and I think I didn't face that because much earlier there were the great women singers, iconic singers. Remember, it is this tradition that has given us somebody like Kesarbai Kerkar to look up to. And not only was her genius and brilliance unmatched and could not be doubted, but also that she performed on her own terms. She could tick off, there are many anecdotes about her ticking off very powerful people in public and chastising them for disturbing her performance. And she held her own. So I think we have a tradition where women artists have already established through their own merit and through their own strength of character that they will perform on their own terms and conditions. Remember that she was also an artist who decided at the peak of her form to stop performing because she felt she didn't want anybody to hear her when her form was on the decline. Now, do we have that kind of strength? Do we want to make a resolution like that? I think the examples are there, so I can't really take any credit for not having been told that, I'm singing with a sense of abandon, or that I'm not self-conscious and demure on stage. But I do try and behave myself on stage, of course.
You sent me that snatch of song about the Devar and Bhabhi after we spoke. And then I was excited and I'm excited you brought it up because the first talk of the conference was by Charu Gupta, and she talked about so many things that are present in pulp fictions. And one of the things she talked about was Devar Bhabhi songs and stories, and that there were so many of them because at a certain moment in time, a young girl marrying into a household of strangers, the only other young person with whom she could be friends was often the Devar. And that is why many relationships developed, which were depicted in these songs. Yes. So I was wondering if I could be cheeky and ask you to sing that snatch of the song before we close for today.
Yes, it's a delightful composition. Mori choliya nasaye dari re, Mori choliya nasaye dari re, Esori anari devara, Mori choliya nasaye dari re. That's how it goes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so very much for this conversation, for joining us for the Q&A today. It's been absolutely amazing for us. And I think we all feel that everything that we thought and heard in the last 3 days wo ek tarah se band gaya hamare days for this conversation. So thank you for that. Thanks to everybody who attended the conference, who's been here this evening. Thank you to all the friends we worked with together. We are going to miss this time, but for those of you who've managed to sign up, who've not yet managed to get a spot, you can still try. There may be a few seats left for the play tonight, Lonely Hearts Club, erotic stories of lonely people behind their computers. So see you there, and goodbye for now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shubha.
Thank you.